Thank you very much for the introduction. Yes, so I'm based at University of York, and my colleague, we work and co-present, but she's based in New Zealand, so she found it hard to come over and join us today. But we are long-standing collaborators, despite the many miles between us. And this is a shameless plug for a book that's just been published by Springer on developing online teaching in higher education. And this reflects edited contributions by 9 different authors from, 14 chapters from authors from 9 different countries, right across the world, from North America, Europe, to Asia, around the theme of this question, which is one that's preoccupied us for a while, which is how do we build sustainable staff development for online teaching? Now, if we're approaching this question 2018, we would have a very different perspective then than we do now, clearly. 2018, very much online teaching was a niche, certainly speaking from a UK and a New Zealand perspective, very much a niche undertaking. Now, arguably, digital skills and online tutoring is mainstream, or it should be the business of everyone. But, let's discuss that point. So this is just my perspective on what's happened, what's changed within UK higher education, and in particular my institution, the University of York in the north of England. Really, the shock of COVID, which I don't need to overestimate, 2019-20, the immediate sort of rush to offer a solution in lockdown, which for most staff that had no exposure to online tutoring was simply a replication of campus-based teaching habits, but simply making their teaching materials digital by, as Melissa was talking about this morning, lecture recording in uncurated ways, just long sort of lectures, making those available, dumping a lot of content material onto our learning management system or VLE. So in a rather panicked way. And then we saw a step change as central staff development managed to work with programme teams over the summer in the run-up to academic year 2021, where we actually had time to draw a breath and actually sort of think about redesign of teaching, and with that introduce some sort of staff development support. So that was all about thinking, not about replication of what we do in campus-based cycles, but actually thinking about contact time, what contact time with students is for, and where we can actually do things better and use the affordances of technology to actually improve and support a more flexible learning experience. And I think, and this was some of the discussion we were having this morning, I think, about the benefits of hybrid approaches, etc., and flexibility, about this issue around creating greater choice for our students, but also putting the accent where we are going online on active learning opportunities. So less about what I'm doing now, the transmission side of things, more about co-creation, working with students, as well as developing a greater sense of community and peer support, which arguably in the campus-based world was absent before. So that's our journey. But with that, a fair amount of trauma for our staff, and that's the really focus of what I want to talk about today with you, is the staff experience. That pace of change was quite frightening. And a quote from, we did our own internal research at York about staff experience, that journey. And one staff member quoted McWilliam, which we refer to a lot in our staff training, about this need to sort of try and unlearn the traditional classroom pedagogy of how you manage a classroom and manage interaction, and think more from a facilitation perspective about how you build sort of online learning. She found that inspiring, but also at the same time terrifying, because that's a huge leap that she was asked to make in a very short space of time in logic, in terms of how she designed and thought about learning. And equally, the presence that she could project in the classroom or a lecture theatre was not possible when you're dealing with hundreds of students who don't put their cameras on, that don't naturally want to engage online. So how do you project your online teaching persona? How do you mould tutoring strategies to sort of match that environment? So these are some of the issues that I think are important components of how we help staff to make that transition. Think about the instructional role and the different dimensions of instructional support around facilitation, management of learning, rather than actually sort of directing learning in an instructivist way. So, I mean, that leads us to the question then, which is how can we support sustainable, continuous professional learning development for staff? Now, CPLD, that's what Dianne and I have that's our badge for what we see as the priority for staff development. And it's a convergence of the UK continuous professional development, this idea about staff development being something that is never ending. It should be part of an embedded part of value in professional development of all academics and support staff. With the professional learning development, PLD, which is the common way of talking about that in New Zealand, and the real focus on learning and development as a person, as well as your values around teaching as well. So bringing that all together, how do we support that? So the traditional way, I think, we've looked at online tutoring, this applies as much I think COVID is probably, it still does now, is possibly in a kind of a deficit model type of approach, with the focus very much here with new entrants to online teaching in terms of what are the skills, the things they don't know, specifically the technical skills, because that's and it often is, when we're working with academics, their preoccupation as well. How do I wrangle the technology in order to affect effective engagement with my student body? But of course, when we're dealing with continuous professional learning development, we should be looking at the full range of requirements. And these are just illustrative things that I've picked out, and I'm sure, I hope we can sort of extend this categorization further. But for instance, for new staff, as I've mentioned, it's about thinking first and foremost from a foundational point of view about the similarities and differences between classroom and online. It's about understanding your online learners, and this is something that's, I think, caught many staff out, this access to technology, where students are working from home, whether they have an effective working environment and whether they can engage in confidential discussions, collaborative work, do they have suitable technology? Thinking about those different perspectives. When you're dealing with international distance learners, even more so in terms of their different sort of cultural perspectives, which we've just been talking about. The tutoring roles, the tutor voice. But then we go on to if you like, that next phase, which is about developing practice and thinking about pedagogical redesign around. And what I think all sort of staff should be doing is constantly questioning the strategies they're using through evidence-based practice, through the indicators they get, of student engagement, and also the outputs, the outcomes in terms of how students have navigated their way through and engaged with the assessment for a particular course as well. So there's that. And then the wider sort of issues which we've just been talking about as well, this sense of building social cohesion, how do we do that, peer-based learning, communities of practice, as well as grappling with the full potential of technologies. And I think this has been one of the major challenges, not just at York, but across the sector, that there's been a very much a surface level usage of technology, rather than looking at maybe some of the deeper possibilities. A simple example of that to illustrate that, maybe less abstract, is accessibility, and in terms of how we present content materials in different formats. There's so much rich technology there now, which is largely underused, and that's certainly a training and development area. But then we go to the far side, experienced practitioners, those that have been doing this for quite some time, and what are their development needs? And arguably there, it's more around sort of fostering leadership strategies, thinking from a program design perspective across a whole range of models about how we support students, how we enculturate them, and the tutors who support them to support particular pedagogic approaches, think about mentoring, and how we deliver tutoring practice. So there's a whole range of sort of issues there, complexities, I think, when we're talking about staff development for online teaching. But just a caveat to all of this is that there's a temptation when you Google, and I did this, and I even actually had a go with ChatGPT. I typed in, so give me a staff development program for an online tutoring. You know, no prizes for guessing where the emphasis was. It was all on this side, and but there's a commonality, but that's how we tend to see things, and in a very finite way as well. Want to be an excellent online tutor? Do this course, and this is your output. It's almost as if do that and you're done. But there's no one size that fits all to tutor development, and what Dianne and I argue, and this comes out very strongly in the different contributions we've got is, from authors from across the world, is that CPLD is multi-layered and it's multi-dimensional, and it's not linear either, because as we're just discovering now with AI, I mean, it's just ripped up completely our understandings of sort of assessment and how we should do it, and we're having to think again. The technology is forcing us to re-question, you know, our assessment strategies and our pedagogic approach. So this can't be a linear process where you go through particular sort of cycles and you're done. It is a sort of a lifetime commitment, or should be. So this is our way of capturing what we think CPLD should look like. And as you see, it's an ecological support model. So it's not layered in a linear way, but it is layered in terms of different facets of staff development, which we believe staff should be drawing on. And it comes from an outside in and inside out perspective. So internal, external, if you're thinking about where staff sit within an institution. So the outside in is the range of support that we would encourage staff to draw on from outside the institution, which is out there, which should be built into their continuous professional development. Then you have the institutional sort of top-down layered support, and it runs all the way down to the personal reflective sort of areas of support. And I'll just briefly talk around these different influences, these sources of support. But I think the point of this model is to show, and particularly with these arrows, that although these appear to be different facets, in order to build a coherent program of support for staff, we've got to see these as interconnected. And this boundaries is porous in a way, because we can bring in good practice from outside, and we can also project to other institutions what we're doing. We can also do that from a personal level as well, if we're doing reflection on practice and in our day-to-day work. So, now I'm going to draw on some examples from the University of York, but also from our authors, and some of who are actually from the University of London. So, from an institutional side of things, the most obvious of examples to draw on the open educational initiatives, which some of them are quite excellent. And I'm just sort of plucking out some examples, and these are actually explored in the book. But Open Teach, for instance, was and some of you may know this, was the professional development project set up for Ireland, for Irish tertiary education, which supported open education development. So that was one excellent sort of initiative which was put out there, but for capacity building for a whole national educational sector. Then, of course, there's the Bloomsbury Learning Exchange, and a very successful Coursera MOOC that has been running and continues to run, which is all about sort of sharing practical teaching. Is anyone from the Bloomsbury Learning Exchange here? Right, well, of course.
Yeah.
Speak to that.
I am.
Well, I wasn't involved in it, but I'm going to take a photo of it and send a message to my friends, say how proud we are of them.
Absolutely. Yeah. Well, Sarah Shrem is the person who's a colleague, friend of mine, and she's going to say.
It was Sarah I was going to send the that too, if that's okay.
Yeah.
I'll get you in then, Rich.
Okay.
Sorry, I just interrupted the whole thing. Let me just do a bit of social media.
Social media is always good. And then the professional development frameworks, again, Ireland, I don't know if you're familiar with that. Sorry?
That's a lot of
Yes, was definitely part of that. And it continues to run and draw in thousands of participants from across the world. So yeah, That's MOOCs, professional development frameworks. Atlas was one which I wasn't familiar with, but came out very strongly in one of the chapters there. But clearly there are others. CMOCs can be used in that way as well, but it's also a professional accreditations for framework, as is UKP, etc. So these are all things that are out there externally, drawn on and helped us to build new insights. But also the cross-institutional side of things is also very powerful. Now, we've just been talking about cross-cultural perspectives in teaching, and this is something that Dianne and I are very keen on, and actually pre-pandemic, so this was 2017, we actually set up our own virtual exchange where we brought together our online tutors at York and Waikato, which is in the North Island of New Zealand, and they were partnered up and virtually. We couldn't afford to bring them together to share practice, and this is incredibly powerful. And I won't just have PowerPoint karaoke, but what these tutors said, or just plucked out these quotations. But basically, what they're saying is that sometimes it's really powerful to get that outside-in perspective, where there's no contextual baggage in terms of the rules and regulations, why they're in place, or why particular assessment is approved of, and other types of assessment are not. Ways of doing things. You can, but also with technologies, the choice of institutional technology could be very different, as it was in this case, and this opens up new sort of avenues for different perspectives on the art of the possible. So that's something that we've sort of researched into the experience of tutors, and it's been very powerful. Okay, just come to part of I will rattle on. So that's the outside in, and then you've got the more centrally managed opportunities. And I suppose I'm on more comfortable ground here because this is my area at York to oversee. But instructional design support, actually sort of formalising that in terms of workshops. That's there are a number of institutions up and down the country that run sort of workshops on ADDIE and ABC frameworks. ABC was, of course, developed at UCL in London, so is very well known here, I'm sure. Also training workshops on technological, pedagogical sort of content knowledge, what that means in terms of the interaction between the use of the technology and your pedagogical aims. And at York, we run a number of different sort of targeted workshops then on sort of community building, inclusive learning, and what we mean by active online learning, how that supports learners. And then internally, we've run our own peer observation and dissemination of good practice in self-study courses. So I'll just briefly talk about this.
The questions.
Okay, right. Well, I will not then talk about that. So that was the course. Then finally, program level supports, which so it's not all about actually centrally what you do, but it's also acknowledging the networks that you're part of in program teams and pushing out good practice across an institution and beyond. And then finally, the self-reflection side of things, thinking about micro-level engagements, peer-to-peer, and also personal evaluation and research on practice. So these are all the different facets, and what I wanted to end up with was a discussion with you actually on what strategies your institutions use, how do you bring this all together. Do I have time at the end of the discussion to sum up what I've done, or should I do that now?
Let's do it now. Let's do it now.
Right, okay, so sorry. So, well, the conclusions I was going to sort of finish up with anyway is that whatever type of model you go for, whether it's this ecological one or not, you've got to ensure that the CPLD is, first of all, it's authentic. It puts staff in a position where they actually experience what their students are going to experience. So it has to be online, it has to be situated in the type of academic sort of context. But it has to be flexible to meet their needs, and that rather than being something imposed upon them at a particular time and place. And it has to have that balance of the digital competencies, yes, they're important, but married with the pedagogical art of the possible as well. And ideally, the strength is when you bring in and develop sort of networks through collaboration and social practice as well. And there is no finite point to it. There shouldn't be. We should be constantly encouraging our staff to engage in CPLD and to constantly evaluate. And that is it. Sorry for.
Thank you very much.
We'll get picture of the group.
But
Yeah.
should we do a quick, like 3 minutes for questions and to get on to our lightning talk before, so I don't keep you all for the keynotes. Are there any? No.
I liked your whole thing around unlearning, but I missed a bit in your like new to online teaching. All of that is kind of this different dimension of how new they are to teaching in general. Because I think the unlearning is probably harder when you've been an educator. But like speaking for myself, like when I started teaching, COVID hadn't happened. So for me, there was not idea learning. And so I feel that I might have got quicker to the middle part. So yeah, just mentioning that in I don't know.
No, I think that's really interesting. It's generational thing, isn't it? And for most of the target audience of staff at my university, they're already quite advanced in their classroom teaching, and they have no personal experience of learning as an online student. So it's extremely hard for them then to perceive the student learning experience, what we were doing to students during COVID. But the new entrants who just know nothing different, then or are new to the profession, and obviously that transition is much quicker.
I think we should probably get down to see her time now, so we have to get out here. But if there's some time left at the end, we'll turn to a second question.
It was really.
Thank you very much.